Hi, everybody. Welcome to La Lista, a LatinX writers podcast. I am your host, Ruben Mendive, and today I have a brand new writer here via Zoom. You know, stay-at-home order, social distancing, so we're doing all that. So my first question is, give us your name and how you identify.
My name is Maria Mealla. How I identify just as Latina.
Okay,
yeah,
cool.
I think that's pretty straightforward. I can go deeper. I can be like feminist, progressive.
Sure,
yeah,
it's truly whatever comes to mind, you know?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. And my follow-up question is, where are you from and whatever that means to you?
So I am Boliviana. I was born in Florida, actually, in Boynton Beach, Florida. My dad had a business exporting coffee at the time, so he was doing like a lot of back and forth between Florida and Bolivia. And my mom was like super pregnant, so they decided to just like stay there for a while. So I was born in Florida, lived there until I was like 3, and then I moved back to Bolivia and stayed there. Did a little bit of back and forth, had like a couple of semesters in Florida in elementary school, but then just stayed in Bolivia through high school and moved back up here for college.
All right.
When I was 18.
Interesting. Well, let's start with your parents. So like, what's their story? I'm always curious about your parents, grandparents, like what's the origin of your family, you know?
So my family is like deep Bolivian, like very generations of Bolivians living in La Paz. My mom was an artist. She was like, she does everything. She was like an acrylic painter. She used to weld. She had like a garage in our living room in our house in Bolivia where she'd just like weld stuff. Like all of our furniture was like made by her. And my dad ran like a coffee business, and he ran like exporting businesses from Bolivia. So he like grew his own coffee. After a while, my mom like owned a little coffee shop. I grew up drinking a lot of fucking coffee. My first job was obviously, you know, just helping out at the cafe and like, you know, waiting tables and stuff. But yeah, my mom owned the coffee shop. My dad grew coffee and exported it around the world. So
yeah, that's cool. And you know, I don't know a ton about Bolivia. Don't really know if I could point it out on a map right now. So like, where is it located? What's it like for someone that's never been there?
Bolivia, the country is the heart of South America. It's like in the middle. It's landlocked. It borders like most of the other countries in South America, and because of like its location, it's also has like pretty much every, like we've got the Andes, we've got the Amazon, you know, we've got lakes, Altiplano Valley, we've got everything, right? And it's, even though it's like a pretty small country. I'm from La Paz, Bolivia, which is actually super high altitude. So it's like the equivalent would be Colorado, I guess, in the States, you know, like that's kind of weather that we had. And that's where I grew up. It's one of those like really funny things, because like when people like imagine Latinos, you know, they're like, oh, warm weather, tropical people. And I'm like, no, I'm very much a mountain Latina. You know? I was like, grew up eating stews and potatoes and rice, you know, like high altitude, never showed my legs, always had a jacket, you know? Yeah.
And how would you describe like your household and your like childhood growing up, you know, because you mentioned you sort of were like a little bit moving back and forth in elementary. So like, just what was that experience like?
It was fun. It was weird. I mean, I had kind of like a chaotic childhood, I guess. I have 3 half siblings from my dad's first marriage. So growing up, there was like 5 kids in the house for a lot of it. Then my parents got divorced when I was around 14. My mom jumped around, so I had like tons of different apartments, you know. We moved like all the time, like my mom, my little sister, and I. So I think that I was literally living in a different apartment every year, you know, after that, like from middle school through high school. It was through elementary that we traveled back and forth, which was fine, I guess. I mean, I think it's part of the reasons why I'm kind of detached as far as friends go, you know. I have friends everywhere, but you know how people have like, and like I keep in touch with like all of my friends. I have a high school WhatsApp group from all the people that I knew like in Bolivia, you know, and I have like my college WhatsApp group. They're all on mute because people like posting all day long.
Yeah.
But I don't have like that, that need that is very Latin with like a really tight community, because I've been everywhere, traveled a lot.
And did you, like coming to like school for a little bit back and forth as a kid, like what was your impression of it to like be in like a different country, like in like a different like culture? Was that something that you were aware of while you were there?
Kind of. I mean, I think that like the little things that stuck out that I still remember were coming to the States and realizing how many more resources there were,
Yeah.
like in Bolivia, like Bolivia's still like third world country, but you grow up with like such appreciation for like everything sacred, so like markers, like put the cap on a marker, crayons, they're sacred, you don't crack them, everything has like value. And over in the States, like there was more abundancy of it, and it was like less sacred to a certain extent, they were like, kids just like drawing and throwing things out, and for me I was like, oh my god, like counting my crayons in the box at the end of the night, so it was weird to see that these things just existed in bulk, and people didn't have like that specific value toward them. So that was my experience coming to school here, and then when I returned there, it was like the opposite experience where I was always like bringing Western culture, so stuff like Lisa Frank stickers, I was like the cool kid who had like all these fucking stickers, or like really cool Trapper Keepers, stuff like that. So I remember like bringing that, and coming like arriving like Santa Claus for like my cousins and friends, like with backpacks full of like knickknacks, Americanizing my circles, my small circles.
Yeah, because I am curious about that, because like what was the impression that like other kids had of you coming back from like the US? Like
it was weird. I mean, for most of it, I think that like nobody at that age, you don't really like miss each other, and that was like before obviously the internet, like communicating like we do now, to where they just kind of forgot me, every time I was gone. And then when I came back, I was like, oh yeah. So I remember at first like having feeling of FOMO where you had like your one best friend and you come back and now she has a new best friend, and you're like, fuck, so it was like I was always like the girl that didn't have like the best friend in elementary school, like in the pairs of twos. But once I was back, they were always like, happy to see me. It was it was weird. There was like a lot of like adjustment periods,
Yeah, I bet. And so like going into like high school, I always ask people like, who were you pretending to be, and like how did other people see you?
Oh man, so pretending, that's like a really interesting question. So when I was 15, I was diagnosed with cancer, and I had Hodgkin's lymphoma, and that kind of like just changed everything. Like briefly before that, I joined like this youth group at the Catholic Church, so I'd become like super involved with the church. And this was like right as my parents had like split up. I was like teaching confirmation lessons. I was dating the head singer in the choir, My mom would be like pissed about it, instead of like being one of those moms that's like, oh, my kid, she's in church, she'd be like, you spend more time in church than at home, así, ¿por qué no te mudas? Take your stuff there. But it was literally like I was teaching confirmation classes on Tuesday and Thursday evenings, on Friday and Saturday, going to church on Sunday, and then I'd go to church on Tuesdays and Thursdays before school. Like so much fucking time in church.
Yeah.
And I was also a theater kid. So it was a lot of like ping-ponging between like church and theater. And at 15, like when I was diagnosed with cancer, I went through like the whole thing, like a year of chemotherapy and radiation. I traveled to like Austin for treatment. I lost all my hair. I couldn't, because of like the chemotherapy, I couldn't be in the sun. So all of the things where as a teenager, you're like kind of insecure and shy. I had to get over that shit quick, because I was like my skin was like puffy and turning translucent, I didn't have any hair, I was still trying to go to school. Like at that point, like I remember having a conversation with my dad where like he thought I was going to die, and I was just worried I was going to fail because I was like missing so much school and I didn't want to get held back, like the idea of dying like had never even crossed my mind. I was just like, fuck, I have to go to school. If I fail out, I'm going to, have to like start over with a bunch of kids, So I think that like after that, like recovering from that and coming back, one, it's like I just had a different sense of life, you know. Once the idea like landed in my head, like, oh, you might die, you know, it's just like more things are available to you when you know when the stakes are that high. You're like, all right, well then might as well do this, might as well do that. You kind of just lose a fear, you know, lose that insecurity. And also like just, you know, when you have to get, you look in the mirror and you don't have any hair and you're like kind of inflamed and your skin's like translucent. Your mom's forcing you to go out with like a fucking straw hat this big because she's scared you're going to be exposed to the sun, you know, turtlenecks in every color. It was gross. It was a really gross year. So you kind of like you know, get out of that mindset. So I didn't do much pretending, you know, I was like all in high school. I knew exactly who I was, you know. Had a poor boyfriend at the time, you know, who went through like the most traumatic experience of his young life, having to take me and going through all that, you know. So we were tight. Like usually couples at that age don't have to go through that kind of stuff, you know. We probably just broken up and then whatever, but we ended up dating through all of high school. Through
like high school, like did you have any sense of like what you wanted to do after? Just because it felt like a lot was going on. So like, did you know like what you wanted to pursue and like and do after?
I mean, kind of. I thought I wanted to be a theater actress. So I went to college. I actually went to college at St. Edward's University, which is a Catholic university in Austin. I picked Austin because that's where I had my cancer treatment when I was 16. And I remember it being cool, you know, and it was like one of the only places I remembered. And, you know, as a teenager, your memories are different than they are as a kid. Like when I was going to Florida. Yeah. So I was like, cool, Austin, that's where I want to go. And then St. Edward's University is a Catholic school, which felt safe since I had been so involved, you know? So I applied there. And then just like moved out here. What was the question? I feel like just like lost the where I was going with that.
It's just like what you wanted to pursue after high school, and like, did you know? Did you have a plan?
So I went to college and I started studying theater. And it was weird because they tried, when I was pursuing it as an actress, they tried stereotyping me into these roles, you know? It was weird, like as the Latina character. And again, like I'm very much a Latina, but I'm like a mountain Latina, which like it's hard for people to understand that, you know? Like I mean, as far as like Latin culture goes, I think that what is across the board is there's just a warmth there, you know? There's like an interdependence and all that stuff is still there. I'm also like, you know, I grew up in the mountains. I'm not like your sexy Latina that's going to like come out and like pour a glass of cold water on myself. Yeah. I'm not like steaming all the time. I'm usually like cold, you know, I wear like Chuck Taylors, put my hair in a braid, you know? And they had like a hard time with that. So they kept like trying to typecast me into these like sexy roles and, you know, smaller, like the crazy neighbor, the, you know, sexy maid, this, that. And I was just like, I was getting such minimal roles that I kind of started pursuing directing. And I had a really, really cool professor too, actually, that like pushed me that direction. They were like, oh, you'd be good at this. Do you want to try this out? And I tried it out and I loved it, like fell in love with it, like directing for theater. I think the first play that I directed was Rhinoceros by Eugene Ionesco, which was so fun. And I did a good job at it. And then like I got invited to like directing 2, which was a class that you could get into by invitation only. There were only 4 spots. And then I was like, cool, this is what I want to do. I want to direct for theater. And I moved to San Francisco, California, which is where I live, thinking that that's what I was going to do, that I was going to direct theater.
Yeah. And, you know, I'm really curious of like what, because you mentioned you wanted to that you went to school in Austin just because you had sort of been there. I'm just curious of like, what was that journey between like, because you had already had like, we're familiar with the US, but how does it go from going from like high school in Bolivia to then going to Austin? Like, what was, like, again, I'm going to ask like the same thing with like Florida. Was there like a culture shock? Was there like some things that surprised you about it? And what did your parents think? That's the other thing.
Huge culture shock. Yeah. Way more than I expected. So when I first moved out, I moved in with like a Bolivian friend who was going to college in Austin. She was going to like a community college. And I moved into her apartment and it was like, literally we were sharing a bed for like the first 6 months. And then the school year in Bolivia also ends differently, like in December. So then I just moved out here and spent 6 months just working, trying to get acclimated. But the culture shock was like real. Like I was only hanging out with Bolivians at first, and then like expanded to only hanging out with Latin people. You know, I had like a few Colombian friends and Mexican friends and anybody that like was introduced to me by that first group.
Yeah.
And then when I started college, I moved into the dorms and then kind of like became friends with everybody, the girls on my floor, you know.
Yeah.
But I remember like there was just very Catholic, you know. Even though like I have a lot of friends that aren't really like practicing Catholic, it's like very ingrained in society, right? So like the proper way of acting, your upbringing, it's all like based on Catholic values, you know. And Austin is like super liberal, so I was exposed to things that like I didn't even know I had an opinion about them, you know. And that like includes like a bunch of like being in Bolivia. My mom had a bunch of gay friends, for instance, you know, and I had a lot of tíos, todos los tíos, you know, that my mom would bring over. They'd get drunk and whatever, and it was like a bunch of fun in the house. And I had a few like gay friends of my own, you know, but I remember going to college and then like having a girl in my dorm whose dad had passed away a year earlier, and her mom started dating women, you know, and it like blew my fucking mind, you know, that was even a possibility, because I just couldn't imagine that in a million years, you know. And seeing it, and just like I had to like do all this processing on my own, you know, like how do I have an opinion of this? Why do I have an opinion about this? Like what right do I have to have an opinion about this, you know? And like coming to terms, and now like I don't identify as Catholic at all anymore. You know, that's like gone out the door after like a lot of years of living in the States and being exposed to different things, and you know, just really thinking about where my beliefs lie. But I grew up so Catholic that there are certain things that if you'd ask me like a random question, maybe I don't even know what I believe anymore, you know? Because like I knew what I believed back then, but I don't know what replaces that belief now, you know, because I haven't given it more thought, you know?
I think we're all just trending towards like crystals.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we just all go back to the cosmos.
Yeah. And yeah, like what did your parents think about you moving to Austin? Because, you know, I think what's interesting, it's like you were born in Florida, then you're like switching back and forth in elementary school, then you're like in high school. What did your parents think of you moving to Austin? But also, like, did you have any sense of like Americanness just innately? Just like any connection, any sense of like that's where I was born? Did that even take consideration into your own identity? You know? No,
not at all. The reason why I moved out here is because I wanted to pursue theater, and that was just like not an option. You know. The closest thing that there was at the time in Bolivia is like being a reporter, you know, and like presenting in like news in one of the local channels, you know, or being like a talk show host. But there was no such thing as being able to support yourself. My parents were super supportive in that they didn't challenge my decisions or ask a lot of questions. You know, they were like, all right, whatever you want to do, you know. No, I wouldn't say that they were like encouraging, like, you know, buying me resources to whatever, like looking at things, you know. They weren't like taking me to plays or researching with me, but they were like, whatever makes you happy, you know, which was enough to put me on a plane and get out of there.
How often do you like go back to Bolivia?
So the last time I was there was 2016. And before that, 2014.
Yeah.
Before that,
are your parents still out there?
Yeah, they're both out there. It's tough, man.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm from Chicago, and I'm still like, if I can make it there once a year, it's like,
totally.
Yeah. So like why San Francisco after you graduated college? Like why did San Francisco call to you?
So I had a friend, another Bolivian friend actually, that lived in San Francisco at the time. And I'd visited him a couple of times during like, you know, breaks when I was in college. And then I had a screenwriting professor who told me that he knew a director of a theater company in San Francisco. And I was like, oh, cool, you know, and he was just like talking it up to me. And I was like, well, I have a friend there, you know, I have like somebody that's like an anchor so that I wouldn't be like brand new in the city. Yeah. And he put me in touch with that person, and I became like his intern, you know, it's like the assistant. And that was enough to move out here. I actually moved out here with my sister at the time. My younger sister was like, living in Austin with me. She just like moved up when she finished high school. So we moved to San Francisco together.
And did you like notice any like change between like Austin and like San Francisco once you like made it over there?
Totally. Like, I mean, I thought Austin, like when I got to Austin, I was like, oh my God, this place is so liberal, because I was from Bolivia. And then when I came to San Francisco, I was like, like my mind was blown all over again, you know, because this is just like, it's the mecca of you know, liberal thoughts, not necessarily like progressive economically or as far as equality goes in the Bay Area, but as far as like, you know, be whoever you want to be, do whatever you want, it is.
Yeah. And so like, what did you get up to in San Francisco? Like I'm always curious about, I say this about LA a lot, but I'm always curious about like the first couple of years when you move to a new city and you're sort of just, you know, you're out of college, you're trying to build a career, you're trying to like figure life out. So like, can you describe those first couple of years?
Yeah. So I actually moved out here with my sister. We moved in with this friend of mine, who from the time I visited to the time I moved to San Francisco, which is probably like a year and a half, he had gone through some like drastic transformations. So now he was living, and then I was living, because I moved in like this hippie commune of like 12 people in the outer Richmond. Okay, so the outer Richmond is like cold as fuck. It's like foggy all day long. And it was like, I'm trying to like, we had a garden, you know, that you had to go weed. Like weeding the garden was on the chore wheel.
Got it.
We weren't allowed to bring meat into the house, you know, because it was just a full vegan household. We had a yoga room, but not a living room. So there's like a room where we would do yoga, or there were like drum circles, but there was no like couches to go just hang out, you know. I did not do well in this house. Like all those people are like my friends now, you know. I love them, but it was just not what a lifestyle that I wanted, you know. I still like feel resentment over having to weed a garden that I never like ate out of, you know. Which is funny because on like my 45th day of quarantine, I'm like fucking growing shit on my windowsill. Doing a lot of home gardening. Yeah, exactly. But back then I was like super resentful over it. And that was like 2008. So it was like the economy had just crashed. I came out, I was the assistant to this director at this theater community. I'm not going to say the company's name, but I am going to say that I didn't like their theater. Yeah. So like straight out of the bat, like I saw like 2 plays and I was like, man, I don't like this. Like we were doing better shit at my college, you know, than they're putting on here. So it's kind of like disheartening, you know, and made me not want to work as hard. I started waiting tables and got laid off within like a month and a half, just because everybody was getting laid off, you know?
Yeah.
So I felt like San Francisco was trying to kill me, you know? I remember like telling my dad, I was like on the phone with my dad trying to explain stories, and there was like a day that we'd all gone out dumpster diving behind Rainbow grocery store because they were like throwing out their bread and stuff. This is like with my hippie commune friends. And my dad was like, oh my God, what's going on? You know, he's like, why are you looking in the trash for bread? You know, he's like freaking out about it. And I was like, no, Dad, it's cool. You know, but in my head, I was like, not cool. Like, you know, not what I want to be doing, you know? So I actually ended up moving to Spain for a year because I had a couple of friends out there that were teaching English. And somebody dropped out and they were like, hey, there's this opening. You want to throw your name in the hat? And I was like, yes, desperately. I felt like I was drowning in San Francisco. I didn't have a job, you know. I was canvassing, which is like the most brutal experience a person has, you know. Yeah. If you want to practice rejection as a screenwriter, you should just go canvassing for like 3 months. You'll get really good at getting rejected, you know. Just like about 75 rejections a day, you know. Really tightens up that skin. But yeah, so I moved to Spain and I lived out there for like almost a year. Decided I was going to try San Francisco again because I was like, it's a place. A place can't beat you. Yeah. I was like, you have to try again and try something different. And now I've been here for like 12 years. So
yeah, and I'm curious, what is the like theater scene like in San Francisco? Just from like your experience of it, like how would you describe it? I
mean, the theater, I love going still. I'd say that like in the Bay Area, it's better than San Francisco alone, you know? Like there's a lot of like Berkeley Rep puts on like great stuff, you know? There's a lot of cool theater in Oakland. It's super cliquey. It's like hard to break into. It's like the same people. The few times that I go out to the theater, you see like the same people on stage. It's the same people directing, you know? But it's good. I still want to say that, like, honestly, the theater in Austin was better. Like across the board, like going out to the theater and stuff, you know?
Yeah. And
put on better shows.
You know, because I'm from Chicago, like I don't really know Southern California, let alone San Francisco, super well. So I'm just curious also about like the Latinx community there. Like
Here?
Yeah, in San Francisco. Were you able to like, well, you know, just because I'm sure it was different than, because from Chicago to LA, it's different. And so what was your experience like in Austin compared to San Francisco, and like how you fit into that?
So my Latinx experience in Austin was still very Bolivian. Yeah. It was like at the center, like I was just hanging out mainly with Bolivian people that had gone like to the same, you know, city that I did, you know, like slightly older, slightly younger. And then like, everybody I met was based out of that core group of friends. And then when I moved out here, it was different. Like I just, you know, you're just kind of, Latin people are like magnets. You just find each other across the room, you know, and just like, whoop. So like I made friends that I keep now at like every place I've worked, you know, and definitely like in the indie film community here. I work as a producer, commercial corporate producer. So all the Latin people, we try to work together a lot, you know, and especially anytime that there's like cool artistic opportunities, we like hire each other more, you know, just try to like make a net, lift as many people up as you can. And we try to meet often, you know. I think I have like a good amount of Argentinian friends here, a good amount of Colombian friends here. And there's also like a bunch of Bolivians here too, which I actually didn't know them until, I don't know if you know, but there's like a huge crisis in Bolivia in November. Yeah, we like overthrew the president. He like left, and there was like a 21-day strike in Bolivia. So we were striking up here too. They were like, "Oh, there's gonna be a protest in Cisco." And I was like, "Cool, I'll like fucking make a sign and show up and see if anybody else shows up." You know? And I was like, "Oh my god, there's 80 Bolivians here. That's nuts! You know, how did I not know any of you?"
Yeah.
But now we all know each other. Just another WhatsApp group that's on mute half the time. Bay Area Bolivians sharing resources and jokes.
So, you know, you sort of mentioned that you sort of like made your way out of theater. Like, so what did you like move into after that?
Film. I think at some point I decided that I just wanted to be a storyteller, you know. Like when I was in Spain, I was writing so much. And when I was in college, I like wrote a few plays and then mainly like short stories. And when I was in Spain, like this guy that I was dating at the time took me to this really cool thing, like one of the coolest things I've ever been to in my life. But it was like a night of cuentacuentos, which is literally just like fucking magical looking people standing on a soapbox and just telling you a story like you're a little kid, you know?
Yeah.
And I was just like, this is awesome, you know? I felt better than theater. I was just like one person, you know, just doing all these voices and like looking at you. It's like so captivating. And at that point I was like, I could do that the rest of my life and be totally happy, you know? So I think that that's when I started like writing more than anything. I realized that living in Spain, it was like the one thing that I had full control over. Because even with like theater, much like film, which I also direct short films, and I just finished a feature. But it's such a collaborative art, right? It takes so much time and resources to be able to get on set and do something, you know? And writing, you have like full control over, you know, I can do it whenever I want. It's a coping skill, you know? So I started doing that when I was in Spain. And then when I moved back, there's a group out here in San Francisco called Scary Cow, and it is a film co-op. So the gist of it is that if you can come up with a pitch, you know, that attracts people into making a team, then you can make a movie. Like in the co-op, there's gaffers, there's makeup artists, there's sound people, you know, there's everything. And people just want to make cool stuff. And mainly it's because, I mean, in the Bay Area, almost all the work is like corporate, commercial, you know, a lot of talking head stuff.
Yeah.
So people just want to make art, you know, music videos, fun stuff. So you're in the co-op, and everybody's basically working for free and bringing their own equipment and stuff. And sometimes you pitch, sometimes you work on other people's projects. Like I've done scripty and first AD, and I've done produced and done production design and blah blah blah. But I started doing that more and more, which I turned to screenwriting a lot more than theater, which I'd been doing before.
And I'm always curious of like where people's like sort of like storytelling sort of sense as a writer comes in, and like can you sort of like trace that? And again, this can even go back to like childhood of just like where did you like know that it's like, oh, this is something I like, something I'm good at, something that's like something that I really want to pursue even,
God, I don't know. I think that, like, I remember reading, do you know Isabel Allende? I got obsessed with Isabel Allende in high school. She's got this book, like, my intro to her was this book of short stories called Cuentos de Baluna. And that's, like, where, one, I got introduced to her, and, like, a totally different type of magical realism, right? Like, growing up in school, you read like 100 Years of Solitude and all this stuff. You just get introduced to like these bigger ones. And Isabel Allende is something that I like had found on my own. Later, I think that we all had to read like The House of Spirits or something as a class. Part of like high school in Bolivia, you read all these classics that people reference here as like, oh, the romances. And for me, it was like I had like 20 essays to write about that book. It was like might as well have been Animal Farm for me.
Totally.
But like I loved it, and I started writing. I just come up with like ideas and started writing at first a lot in her style, trying to like come up with that, and slowly developed my own style. So I think I started it like in high school, really writing stories.
So when were you at the point where you sort of started making your own films,
So the first short film that I made was with Scary Cow. It's called The Notes in the Hat, and it was about a guy that falls in love with a mime that is like performing in Golden Gate Park.
Got it.
It's thanks to Scary Cow that I like made it, because I had no business making a movie. I had no idea what the fuck I was doing. Like the sound in it is awful. Like the concept of sound being a problem, like cutting back and forth and stuff. It's not something that I had to worry about growing up in theater, like it's all like very controlled. So I didn't have craft services, which is something that like as a project owner, you kind of have to provide.
Yeah.
I remember we're shooting in like crazy hot day in the middle of Golden Gate Park, and halfway through the day I was like, I should probably get some water for everyone. I was like, I'm thirsty. Everybody else might be thirsty. Didn't even have water for people,
Yeah.
All in all, when I look back at it, I was like, this turned out all right, for like a first film ever for somebody who had no film experience. I was like, this isn't that bad.
Yeah, and you sort of have to learn on the job for some of these things.
So yeah, I did that. Then I did 3 other shorts and decided that I was going to make a feature. I wrote the feature when I was in Spain, actually. So I made the first short here, then moved to Spain, wrote a feature, came back, made 2 shorts, and then shot the feature. And the feature, which was never released, I mean, it's completed, but I never like put it out there, was again something that I was like, I had no business doing. A lot of the things that I've achieved in my life have been because I had no idea what the fuck I was getting into, and nobody tried to stop me,
Yeah.
And the one thing that like my parents did tell me is like, if you start something, you have to finish it, So that's kind of how it was like with my first feature and like all those other projects. First feature was like painful to make.
Yeah. And, I'm curious about that, because it's like a lot of people just say even start is like, getting over that hill to be like, and now, and, for a lot of times people like ask like, oh, well, how do you do this? How do you do this? And a lot of time the response is like, you just start doing it. And then you sort of just like, then you're doing it. And then you have to like, you're sort of taking things as they come. Totally. So like, how can you describe the experience of just like even getting started and how you put together for the feature? Like, how were you like, you have the idea, I'm gonna like make a feature. So like, what were the next 2-3 steps,
So like, I mean, I wrote it in Spain. I edited it while we were shooting, because this is again, now like my last 2 drafts of anything I edit now are for budget. And I started shooting my feature without having made a budget. Because again, like nobody was teaching me these things, you know, didn't come from like an actual film school background. So then just like, you know, day 8 and I was like running out of money. You know, and I was like, oh my God, how are we going to finish this? You know, made it with a bunch of my friends, you know, a bunch of people that my sound guy on that has been my sound guy in every personal project ever. His name's Stan. He's amazing, you know. Older Asian man. It's really funny. Like the last project that we worked on together, he was like, Maria, why are your projects always so crazy? And I was like, I'm so sorry. I never know they're gonna be when we start. You know? It just kind of happens.
And like, what was the feature about? You know,
the feature was called Women in Cigarettes. It was about it was a rom-com about a door-to-door makeup salesman. This dude that like is just, you know, kind of like canvassing out on his luck, so he's trying to like sell products door to door to make some money, who falls in love with a stripper. And they're both kind of trying to like hide what they do, you know. I was 23 when I wrote it. Disclaimer.
Listen, you made a feature at 23, you know?
Yeah.
What did you do after that, you know?
After I finished the feature?
Yeah.
Probably like just laid on the floor between the couch and the coffee table for like 2 months straight, trying to recover. No, I went back to shorts, you know. I was like, I went back to shorts to keep practicing, and back to write a lot.
Yeah.
And I think I actually like, yeah, from making like a bunch of shorts, I started working, like people that I met making shorts were like, hey, you're really good at this. You want to produce for my agency, or I've got a commercial project. Are you interested in doing this? You know? And like you said, you know, just say yes and figure it out on the way. So that's how I moved along the line a lot. And, you know, now that's what I do for a living. So
I had, you know, Jerry Maravilla on. Jerry shouted out your feature, Bring Me An Avocado. So can you just sort of describe, you know, what it's about and just like the experience of making it?
So my feature is called Bring Me An Avocado. It's about a young family's experience of grief in the aftermath of a gun violence incident that leaves the mom in a coma. And it follows a dad with raising his 2 young daughters, you know, and kind of trying to maintain a life for them in spite of the fact that there's like this uncertainty around what's going to happen with the mom.
And what would you say, like, what was the difference between like your other feature and then this feature? Like, what were the lessons that you had learned between those two? And like, why were you again, like, I think I'm ready to like do this?
I mean, to start off with, this one had like a real budget, right? And we fundraised. I mean, I wrote it in 2014 and shot it 2018. So 2014, I started writing it. 2015, just shopping it around, more, you know, rewriting. We shot the 22nd version of that script. But 2016 and 2017 was all just fundraising and development, you know. Lots of pre-production, lots of, you know, getting people on board. So fucking takes a long ass time to make a movie when you're doing it right and not just like, you know, come up with an idea and shoot it the next few weeks.
And, you know, I'm always curious about like the film festival circuit. So like, what has been your experience of like submitting your film and like what it even is to like be like, okay, I have this film, like now what do I do with it? So
that's the film festival circuit is a beast, right? And it's something that I like learned slowly. Like with making my first few shorts, you know, I realized at first you know, I knew, again, not going to film school or coming up with that, it's kind of like researching it on my own. I always knew of the big ones and had no idea that there's just like so more, you know. And there's like huge B festivals that sometimes I still find out about another festival that I hadn't heard before. And like, you know, there's like celebrities attending and cool people and like deals coming out of them. And I'm like, oh, I'd never heard about that one before. I think the last festival that happened to me with was SCAD, which is in Savannah. I'd never heard of it before, ever. And then a bunch of friends got in and I was like looking at their experience through Instagram and social. And I was like, oh my God, this is like a real big festival, you know? But yeah, it's weird. They say that the odds are you get into 1 out of 10. And like, I think that one of the biggest lessons that I learned is like, you just have to be super picky and you have to do a bunch of research, right? It's not really worth submitting. Just like people are like, oh, I'm just going to throw my name in the hat. You know, I was like, well, it's fucking expensive, you know, like if you can afford to do that, that's awesome, you know, but there's a bunch of festivals that like you just have to know, you have to know what they programmed the last few years. There's so many festivals that like are accepting submissions, but then they really only program like 10% of their lineup, from submissions, and all the other films are like invited in from like bigger festivals, or like by invitation. And like smaller festivals do that too. Like in my festival run, there was like at least 3 festivals that we got invited to, which means like a programmer reached out to us, didn't have to pay a fee, and the film got in, which I'm super grateful for. But I'm sure I was also on the other end of that, where like I'm submitting to a festival, and there's no slot, but somehow another filmmaker, didn't even submit and they got in. It's just it's a game. Yeah. And I get it, like when I talk to programmers, who now I have a bunch of programmers, they got to put together, they're curating. It's an art in and of itself. You got to respect the art and the process. They have to find stuff that they're putting on a show for people. So.
Yeah. And, I am curious about like the film community up in San Francisco. Like, like how would you describe it? This like whole film community up there?
The film community in San Francisco is one of the main reasons why I don't want to move to LA, because it's amazing, A lot of it has to do, again, with like the fact that most of the jobs here are corporate, commercial production, So whenever there's like a film to shoot, or a short film or music video, everybody's just game, People are still excited. I feel like there's also like the sense of like protecting each other, like across the board, what the rates are, what an AC is supposed to make when you're hiring him for a commercial shoot, and that he's gonna like, what an indie rate is and who you're hiring, and people are willing to like help you out, and you don't screw. There's just like more, there's family to it, like we're all in it together to make art, and obviously you want to like pay everybody a fair rate, and people are like super transparent about all that stuff. There's no like undercutting rates. Everybody's like protecting themselves. I know that like anytime there's a shoot in LA, there's just like, I can do it for this much. It's like this whole like, like you're betting for a job, and here that just doesn't happen. Like this is what this position makes. Yeah, and it just takes away a lot of the bullshit. Like when that's not a thing that you have to deal with, and there's not like this whole money thing that's going on. You're just kind of like talking about the product that you're making, you're talking about the art.
Yeah. And, I'm always curious to hear about the types of stories writers like to tell. So like, sometimes as writers, we tell the same story over and over. So I'm just curious if you see like, there's like a through line between like the stories that are attractive to you, stories that you like are passionate about, anything that you're just like, it calls you,
So I have a bunch of scripts that are magical realism, again, from those like early influences. Those are not the films that I've made yet. They're just accumulating cyber dust on the computer. But yeah, that's mainly what I want to do. At some point when I have like the right budget, I want to write like these kind of sarcastic, dark, magical pieces, and make those. But for more than other than that, I like very character-driven pieces. I like the anti-hero. I like the idea that people aren't perfect. They're super fucking flawed, and you can still root for them.
Yeah.
You still want people to do good. Even if they're not playing by the book.
Yeah, and I'm always curious also about people who aren't based in LA. Like, is there any plan to move to LA? Is there any like,
I don't know. I think that it's been like on your podcast actually that I've heard like twice that you got to be here to be in the industry, and I'm always like, crushed by it. I guess so. I mean, I don't know how to drive. So that's like a huge fear also in moving to LA,
I will say it's more people moving here now aren't driving.
So maybe it won't be that big of a deterrent. It depends. I mean, I think that I definitely want to move there. I'd have to have like I'm not going to move there and just try to take meetings and, see what happens. Cause I think it's easier. I mean, you need to have the connections. Sometimes I feel like I'm missing out when you throw a mixer and I can't go, and stuff like that. But like, I think that if I plan it enough, I can. It's like an hour flight,
Yeah.
But I think I'd go out there if I had a job, but not go out there to try to get a job, you know?
Yeah.
If I had a job, I would go like in a heartbeat, you know, just pack my bag and make it down there.
Yeah.
But even like, because I also like directing as much as I like writing, I would have moved down there to work in a writer's room in 2 seconds. But making movies, like, there's a reason why like all the productions leave LA to make movies. You know, why they're shooting in like Atlanta and San Francisco and Austin and New Orleans, you know, because it's like fucking hard to make movies down there, you know.
Yeah.
And again, like the crews, anyone below the line, it's their life. They're doing it every day, you know. So here, people still wanting to get together to make like a short film is rare. Is not as common down there, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, so you know, like you mentioned the mixtures and like, you know, you see the pictures, people hanging out, whatever. I will say it's very hard to get people to hang out in LA. So, yeah, that's also true because every time I go down there, I'm like, oh, I'm going to see all these people. Like I was just there for a shoot before the lockdown. I was in LA for 4 days and I saw almost no one, you know. It's also like San Francisco is 7 by 7 miles. You know, it's so easy to go anywhere. Yeah. I can like walk to meet most people and get there in 20 minutes. Yeah.
And then when I'm in LA and I'm like an hour and a half, no way. You know, I'm just gonna have dinner by myself in the hotel. You know.
But it is good to like, because a lot of that stuff, a lot of the social stuff, it's good for relationship building. You know, it's just like this town is very much who you know, so people are always trying to meet and get to know more people. And you know, I say that it's like, yeah, that's a thing here, but it's also like you don't have to be in LA to do that. And I see that you're like very active on Twitter, and I think that that's also like a good avenue for relationship building and for like community. So like, can you just describe like your relationship with Twitter?
Twitter is terrifying and exhausting, but I feel like I have to be on there because I'm not, you know, in LA. I mean, I've met some really cool people on Twitter, you know, that I'm like, oh, this person's amazing. You know, I've been able to like meet face to face with some people, you know, like do like video calls and help each other out, read each other's scripts, you know. You kind of like just make friends that way, I guess, you know, when you're just tweeting back and forth. It's kind of like you're hanging out, you're at a networking party. You just walked into a mixer by yourself, you know. And you have short conversations. Sometimes it's easier on Twitter. You know, It's easier to leave when you're in a mixer in person, you know, and you run out of things to talk about. You're like, I'm going to go to the bathroom again, you know, and just wait there for 5 minutes just to end a conversation and start it. I feel like I belong to a couple different communities in Twitter now, like the writing community and the Latinx community, which there's some overlap, but there isn't like, they're not the same community.
Trust
You're in both too, I know.
More Latinx than anything else, I think.
Yeah, it's the more fun one.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Just to sort of start wrapping up, I'm always curious about the people and the writers that you admire. So these could be heroes of yours. These could be, you know, peers, Twitter friends, people you're obsessed with that you don't even know, but you love what they're doing. So like, who are some of the people that like stand out and whose work you really admire?
I mean, big heroes from a writing perspective, obviously, I already mentioned Isabel Allende, but then Guillermo del Toro. I love him. He's making the type of movies that I want to make, you know, as far as like magical realism and all that goes. I think Pan's Labyrinth is still one of my favorite movies of all time. It's amazing. Regular humans, Jerry, I was going to shout him out from the get-go. You like already brought him up. But yeah, Jerry and I are buddies, and we like read each other's scripts a lot, you know. We like swap scripts and give each other feedback. He's an excellent writer. Somebody else that was on your show that I met on Twitter, who I love, she's amazing, is Edith.
Oh, yeah.
She's just one of those people. So again, back to the whole Twitter being terrifying thing, you know? It's like, suddenly, I mean, I'm just there hanging out. People are saying nice things, and somebody gets their head chopped off, and I'm like, oh my God, why did we crucify this person? You know? Or like, why are we killing these people? You never know when it's going to happen. So I'm just like, always like, you know, you don't know what's going to make mad. I've had people like blow out for like no reason at all. And I'm like, okay, just not trying. That wasn't anything offensive, you know? People are like high sensitive there. It's like a minefield. And Adith is just one of those people that is just always spreading fucking joy, you know? Super kind, super generous. So is Jerry. Gerardo Maravilla, you know? I want to shout them both out.
Great.
Like little writer community.
Yeah, no, I highly recommend them. Met them both. And
in person?
Yeah, in person. They both came to my apartment. I was trying to get you when you were in town, but the scheduling just didn't work out for me. I'm always on the lookout for writers. All right, so like to start wrapping up, I always ask my guests to help title their episode. The prompt is... I
know this because I follow it on Instagram and I didn't first think of anything.
Listen, this is the hardest question. I always prep people with a hard question, and I always lie. This is the hardest question. The prompt is a blank Latinx writer. So in that blank, you can put whatever describes you. It could be more than one word. You could switch them around. Just whatever calls you as a person from this conversation, as a writer. Just. And I always use this as like a recruitment tool. So this is a great way to find community. So based on this description, maybe you'll find someone just like you. So whatever you got.
And Andy's conjured, sarcastic. I think that's enough, right? Andy's conjured, sarcastic, magical realism writer. That too much?
No.
Too many words? Okay.
No, honestly, it's whatever. Let me worry about the graphic, okay?
Okay. Yeah, I'm totally worried about the graphic for you right now.
You know, somehow I always figure it out.
That's so funny.
And this is truly the last question. Where can people find you? So like social media, plugs, everything.
You can find me on Twitter. Scared person in the corner. At Maria underscore. Did I say it? Mealla. On Instagram, MMEALLA.
Perfect.
Find me on Facebook, but I'm never on there anymore.
Yeah, who was? So I want to thank you so much for being a guest on this podcast. I'm
thank
sorry
you. That was so fun.
Zoom. Yeah, well, I had fun too. It's always great to like put a person to the Twitter avatar, you know?
Totally. I was saying that the other day, like, it's fun to, like, during this time, it's fun to finally stop talking with, like, the headshot version of everyone and see what we all really look like, you know? Yeah. That's another reason that makes Twitter intimidating, I think, you know? You always think you're talking to somebody who's, like, professionally dressed